Welcome to Dynasty Life. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. And the show's gotten off to a great start. I've had a bunch of really quality guests on. In fact, I've had repeat guests at this point. Jax Falcone's been on twice. Ian Miller's been on twice. Ryan McDowell's coming back again, Curtis. But everybody's like, when are you getting the Dynasty Commander? Yo, Theo, when's the Dynasty Commander come in? When is Curtis Patrick coming in the house? What's going on? Why have you not had Curtis? We got Curtis. So Curtis Patrick's in the house. Love talking Dynasty with Curtis. If anybody's not aware of Curtis's work, Curtis is at RotoViz. You guys are crushing it. You're continually putting out podcast articles. We are both sharing our trades. We have full disclosure on trades, which a hat tip for that, including the league entry amount. And Curtis is also a league commissioner of mine. I'm in his Black Crown League. This will be my second year in the league. So welcome to Dynasty Life, Curtis. It's about time you got here, and I'm so stoked to talk to you today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Theo. I'm pumped to be here too. I mean, I've had so much respect for your game and Dynasty and redraft for the past couple of years, and it's been kind of cool just how our relationship has come along. You know, really, I think we just kind of noticed each other as players more than anything else. Before you were even doing as much as you're doing from a content production space, we've been bouncing stuff off each other in DMs for a couple of years now, and I mean, I think that's continued to kind of grow and blossom more now, kind of in like just macro thought. But there's still the occasional time where you're like, you know, hey, Curtis, what do you think about this? Or I'll send you something. Hey, did you see this move I made? What do you think? Because it's just nice to get that feedback from somebody that you respect and make sure that, you know, hey, this wasn't actually crazy.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you play FFPC Dynasty, and again, we play other formats too, but when you play FFPC Dynasty, it's a different animal. And there's a few people who I, you know, behind the scenes, I like to talk to about my trade. Curtis, you're definitely one of them. High praise to get, high praise when you go and say, what do you think about a trade? Because at the end of the day, it's your money, it's your entry fees, it's your titles. So you got to stand behind all these things. But, you know, you've been crushing it with the trade content, but I would be remiss if we didn't focus this show on the 2024 rookie class. Extremely exciting class. You guys are putting out a rookie guide. I believe volume 1 just dropped. Why don't you let everybody know about what that is, where they can find it, and sort of the process that RotoViz did with this?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity on that. So this is actually the 7th year now that RotoViz has done a dedicated rookie guide. And it's only been RotoViz branded for, I think, 3 years. It started as the Dynasty Command Center rookie guide. So I think probably you have a lot of viewers, a lot of listeners that remember fondly the days of the Dynasty Command Center Slack channel where Ryan McDowell and I were fostering, you know, kind of a community before Discords and all of that had really taken off. We were just kind of on the bleeding edge of that. And so this is the 7th year now that I've been involved with the rookie guide. I mean, we had humble beginnings. You know, I'm not a publisher. I'm a content creator, but, you know, actually like building a magazine. Is it something that I knew how to do very well 7 years ago? I'm getting better at it every year. We don't hire that piece out, but this is the best that we've ever done. I mean, it looks great, which is helpful because you've got to enjoy looking at it and getting your head around it. I mean, if it's boring to look at and consume, how impactful is it actually going to be? Are you going to remember the things that we want you to remember when you go through it? But we really simplified. You know, in the past couple of years, we had some additional articles in there. We had these massive, you know, several hundred word profiles, even pre-combine on every single player. And it's just a lot when ultimately what most consumers want, Theo, and I know you guys get this, they want the actionable takeaways.
Yes.
Where are these guys ranked and why do you have them there? And so you have to find that balance between giving enough of your process so that people understand how you arrived at the conclusion you arrived at, but don't give them more than they really need. They want to know how to actually, you know, value these players. And so we split up the work into 3 buckets in a really fun way. So Sean did all of the profile blurbs, and we kept most of them to 150 words or less. What are the actionable metrics? What are the peripheral performance metrics that Sean found most intriguing about every player? My contribution and my focus was really on looking at the profile sims from a data-driven perspective. So we took some of the key predictive fantasy metrics, and then I also assigned and assumed draft capital position ranking so that we could come up with profile sims for each player. We'll get into a little bit of that as we talk about some of the players today. And then I converted that also into a profile sims hit rate. So in particular, for running backs and wide receivers, how many of the backs in their top 5 profile sims ended up having at least one RB2 or a wide receiver 2 season. That's what we care about. We're spending our draft picks. Did we get some value out of that at any point, even for one season? And then Blair Andrews, who's our managing editor, he came up with a percentile-based prospect lab score. So as we think about all of the prospects that have entered the league since 2005, what percentile of production do they sit within? There's some age adjustment there, and there's some market share stuff in there. We're not going to get into a lot of that math, but it's basically it's a percentile number. So you have Sean painting the picture of the prospect, me relating that to something easy to digest from a fantasy perspective, and then Blair saying, throw Sean's stuff out, throw Curtis's stuff out, just compared to every prospect that's entered the league in the last 20 or so years. Here's where their percentile prospect lab score sits in. So we got 98 players in this edition of the guide. It's every fantasy position player who is invited to the NFL Combine is in the guide and has a blurb. We have rankings for the top 50. We have some mock drafts in there. I've got some really actionable stuff in terms of where the tiers fall, where I would trade up, where I would trade back. So, it's a rookie draft guide for the fantasy player. If you want to read something where you get, 1,500 words on why a guy's going to go in round 1 or round 2 and a lot of film analysis and people that are great at the catch point and stuff like that, you're not going to get that here. There's other people that do that and do that kind of content well. We made our fantasy football rookie draft guide for fantasy football. So you can get volume 1. It is out now. Volume 2 will drop next week because we're going to put all the adjustments in there for the combine, athletic measurements, etc. And so if you buy the 3-volume set, you get that automatically. You'll get a note that you can download volume 2. So you watch this, you're like, hey, I like how Curtis described this thing. You go buy volume 1, you get that immediately. You'll get volume 2 next week when it updates. And then volume 3 comes out the day after the NFL draft. We know a lot of your audience, Theo, a lot of my audience, they are those high stakes players. We know those drafts occur within a couple of days of the NFL draft finishing up. So we will be hustling to make sure you've got that volume 3 adjustment in your hands 24 hours after the third day of the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's funny. We have so much time to prepare, and then it's like the big scramble between the actual NFL draft and the rookie drafts where you got to drop everything. But I'll say this, we drop a rookie guide as well, player profiler, it's coming out soon. And I think there's something to be said where if you consume from too many people, sometimes you start liking every single player. But I personally really like the RotoViz rookie guide out there in the space. There's a number of rookie guides now that we sort of compete with, but they also use data like we do. I love the fact that you guys have a rookie summit where I know it's like you and Sean and Blair speaking to one another. We've sort of tried to emulate that model a little bit where I've talked to a Cody Carpenter or a John Laube, and we kind of bounce things up. Matty Kiwoom, bounce things off of one another. So I think there's a really nice balance. Don't consume too many rookie guides, but if you're going to go with another one, RotoViz is definitely one that I enjoy, and I think you guys do a great job with it. And we're going to talk about those 2024 rookies, Curtis. And I definitely like your profile sims. I liked you talked about the Marvin Harrison one where, you got all these hits and then Justin Blackmon. And I'm like, Justin Blackmon, he kind of flamed out of the league, but he was a baller for a little bit. So I was okay hearing that one. That was a fun one. We'll dive into that. But everybody who comes into Dynasty Life and sits in that chair has to answer a couple of evergreen questions. You guys put a ton of work into your Dynasty rankings at RotoViz like we do at Player Profiler. And you break it down by tiers, your targets. In the offseason, you're trading for guys, but we don't get everything right. Who was a guy that was a big disappointment for you, whether it was his quality of play on the field or usage this past season? And this could be a 2023 rookie or any veteran.
Yeah, I'll go with a veteran here. And I think this is one that a lot of people will just sigh and they'll be like, yeah, me too. I agree with that. It just really sucks that Tony Pollard didn't hit. Yeah. He was, Pollard is kind of one of my brand guys because I was on him from the NFL draft. I was the person beating the drum for him. I had tweets that Field Yates and Matthew Berry were reading on their shows before. I mean, if you remember when the Cowboys took him in the 3rd round, people were like, "What?" And he had all of this dynamic production in addition to the rushing. As a kick returner, as a punt returner, he checked some really unique boxes, and so he was a massive hit because he cost nothing. And people that consume my content, they had huge exposure to Tony Pollard, and he'd already won. You won the Tony Pollard battle by having him on your roster, the past couple years, and plenty of opportunities to trade him. But last year was supposed to be the year where it just
all
crushed.
came together.
And there's myriad reasons why it didn't work. He had the injury, pretty gruesome injury the year before that people seemed to maybe not wait enough, including myself. And then it just didn't work. I mean, the Cowboys offense still had some exciting production, but Pollard, the stars didn't align. The usage wasn't quite there. And then the execution from the player perspective wasn't really quite there. And so, there was this range of outcomes that included Tony Pollard coming into 2024 as potentially a top 3, dynasty running back. The mileage was still low. He's got a receiving profile. He really could have gone the other direction. And instead, we have a situation where he's probably not even going to remain in Dallas. And it's very difficult to even get like the 112 or the 201 for him right now because rookie fever has set in. So, now you're like, it's come full circle where it's like, hey, not full circle, but 3/4 of the circle, right? You're early on Pollard. He smashes. He then doesn't get that uber smash when it really, was set up for him. And now it's like, am I a bag holder on Tony Pollard? Like, what's going on here? So that's there's a couple that come to mind, but Pollard is the one that sticks out that could have been a win and just didn't materialize.
Is Tony Pollard dust, or is this a guy that bounces back?
I don't think he's dust. I don't think that he's going to achieve that ceiling that everyone saw. But I mean, I could see him sticking for another year or two, having a couple 1,000+ yards from scrimmage seasons. He's been linked to the Minnesota Vikings already early in the free agent process. And I mean, so I think there's some spots where he could land. He's going to have to take a discount. I mean, that's the thing, is the quality of the free agent class. There's guys that just figure to be, they've already proven that they can be more of a 3-down back, more of a bell cow. He's going to go in. He's going to have to compete as part of a committee. Hopefully a team will see, hey, here's the efficiency that he brought when he was being used in tandem with Ezekiel Elliott. If we can manage his touches, let's keep him around 200 touches max, and we can get some of that efficiency to return. And he could still be an exciting fantasy asset in that regard. So, yeah, I don't think he's dust. And unfortunately, he's a hold and a wait and see. But, I mean, if Tony Pollard if he landed in Kansas City, if he landed in Kansas City, right? If he you can, the danger is you could do this with any of the free agent running backs, right? And you can do it with any of the rookie running backs too. Is the landing spot with the running backs, the opportunity and being tied to a quarterback that generates a lot of touchdowns in that offense. It's a siren song, and so we do have to be careful a little bit. But I don't think that he's dust as a player. I think he had a gruesome injury. And I'm willing to give him a little bit of a pass. Let's see how he looks in September next year before we make that call.
So let's go with something positive. Who is a non-Puka Nacua positive surprise for you, whether it was a guy that you were on personally or RotoViz was as a site? Take it any way you want.
This is super exciting because we're going to double dip here because we're going to talk about him in terms of a trade target too, or I think you wanted me to break down a couple of trades I made. I mean, De'Von Achane, man. I remember our rookie summit in 2023. I was making a case for him in December as the 108 in the class. And we had this heated debate because Sean's like, are you telling me that you're telling me this is a decent running back class and a decent, this rookie class has decent depth when you're telling me the 8th best player in the class is a sub 190 running back that's not going to get day one draft capital? I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. And so we ended up, massively overexposed on Achane, and all he did is look like, essentially the most exciting rookie running back in NFL history. His touches were not consistent for, from injury reasons, but I mean, when you look at what he was able to accomplish, Jahmyr Gibbs is universally valued, as basically a top 10 startup in one QB formats, and still borderline first round and super flex formats right now. De'Von Achane had 4.2 fewer expected PPR per game, but he averaged more PPR per game than Gibbs, and he scored 5.3 more points over expectation than Gibbs as a rookie. I mean, they absolutely should be in the same dynasty tier. There's price inefficiency there. Achane should be much more closely rated to Gibbs and Bijan Robinson than he is right now. So what's really exciting about it is he was a huge surprise because it added quality and depth to the 2023 class. It added quality and depth to the running back landscape in fantasy, which was kind of like thirsty for another entrant, right? I mean, the old guard was in trouble, and Achane is a guy that can still make that leap, and he's just the value isn't there. He's valued by the community a full tier below Gibbs. I've been getting roasted for some moves for the most part that I've been posting on Twitter, but I've got a lot of conviction on the player. There's so much more of the pie in Miami for him to potentially grab, and he already was awesome with with the secondary piece of pie there. So yeah, that's a huge win. And I can't believe that we're able to buy a player like this. I think that the fact that he missed some games with his weight being under 190, anyone who was looking for some confirmation bias on injury for him, they have it. And so that's kept his price down.
Yeah, it's so funny. We never hear about it, anything when the 225-pound running backs get hurt, which they do often as well. But, Achane's been one of my guys at Player Profiler. We pounded the table for him. This is a guy that I have a ton of in Dynasty. It makes you feel like very financially stable as a Dynasty manager when you look at your lineup and you got a bunch of Gibbs and a bunch of De'Von Achane. But
it's great.
Let's focus over to next year, 2024. If you could know the final stats of any single player next season, who would it be?
The answer has to be Achane. It has to be, because listen, Mostert scored more than 20 touchdowns. He's going to be 32 years old. If Achane gives us, give him 1 to 3 games that he misses because of, just whatever, being small, managed touches, Mostert carrying the load, whatever excuse you want to make for him. If he plays in the majority of games and he starts to shift towards the 1A in that committee, which he was when he was fully healthy in those games, overall RB1's not out of the question, and overall Dynasty RB1 going into the 2025 season's not out of the question. Those conditions are real and they exist, and if nothing else, the tier jump up into that conversation with Bijan and Breece Hall, it will certainly be there. And Achane is set up because of the discount tied to some of the injury in 2023. He's set up to be the league winner this year. And until he ends up, if you're looking at best ball from a redraft perspective, early on, and until he gets into that top 16 range, you basically just have to be 100% exposed.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up best ball, because I know you're probably sneaking in the underdog early draft streets. I'm there. Every time I draft him in the second round, it feels like a cheat code. He has the highest ceiling of any second rounder right now on the board. And then in terms of Dynasty, he's like the great equalizer, because a lot of these teams that drafted him in single QB at like the 111, 112, 201. I had like a 203 De'Von Achane in a single QB league. Like, that's it. You're printing money for your Dynasty team as long as he stays in the field. 17.5 points per game. How about any player in the 2024 class? If you could know any of the incoming rookies' stats, who would it be?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I kind of have a tie on this one, so we don't have to go deep on either one. I think my 1A answer is Brock Bowers, because Brock Bowers, for those of us that serious Dynasty players are playing in tight end premium formats. We saw how much of a smash Sam Laporta was last year. The tight end position is in a similar need for a Dynasty landscape makeover that the running back position was in. We've got Kelsey is kind of on the outs here. Andrews is still young enough but he's had some injuries mounting. Kittle's getting older. You know, everyone is just waiting. Who can we push the chips in on here? And, you know, Bowers, I mean, he's a tour de force from a production perspective as a collegian. And so, you know, the table is set. We've seen a rookie smash last year. Can Bowers come in and do it? If he does, I mean, you could be staring at a second round dynasty startup pick, you know, next year. I mean, that's where it could potentially land. The other player that I would mention here, the honorable mention, is Jayden Daniels, because
there you go.
Jayden Daniels he seems to have that combination, like it's kind of that combination that Justin Fields had coming in, where he generates the big plays, he has the scrambling ability, and he's got the big arm. So I mean, he has everything that you would want a modern fantasy quarterback to have. And he's also not the quarterback that most people have as their QB1, or even he's not even a universal QB2 at this point. And so when you see what CJ Stroud was able to do last year, it's just a reminder that, you know, rookie quarterbacks actually can be league winners, or they can help you shift from I was in rebuild mode to, here I am sitting in my dynasty title game this year, a year ahead of schedule. And so if I had a crystal ball and I could see Jayden Daniels stats, I mean, that'd be pretty tempting. I mean, if you actually put the two crystal balls right in front of me, I'm not sure which one I would peer into between Brock Bowers and Jayden Daniels, but I think those are my answers.
You get two crystal balls. I love the Jayden Daniels one because I think it also applies to redraft.
Yeah.
It applies to best ball. He's such a cheat code. And I think that you brought up CJ Stroud, but I look at Anthony Richardson, just how impactful he was on a points per game basis, and where you were able to acquire him. And it's also sort of a little perfect storm for Jayden Daniels, where Jayden Daniels lands 3 overall to New England. Let's say Drake May goes at the 102, and you get the nuts landing spots with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers, where let's say they land Arizona, Los Angeles Chargers, bang, bang, back to back. There's a situation where the team with like the 104 or the 105 is going to end up with Jayden Daniels. That's potentially a Lamar Jackson part 2 with his scrambling ability. It's dynamic when you watch him run with the football, and he also is a very effective passer, and he doesn't turn the ball over. This year he was very tight despite that high passing volume. So I'm into Jayden Daniels. I love that answer. And Brock Bowers, that's my tight end too in Dynasty. I have some Trey McBride. I love Trey McBride, but I don't care where he lands. I actually, and I'm interested your thoughts on this. When people ask me where they want me to see, where you want to see Brock Bowers land, I throw out like the ugly spots, Tennessee, Denver, because it would indicate to me that these offenses want to build themselves around Brock Bowers, and that's the pathway to him being a 140 target guy with not having those elite wide receivers around him. I think about the guys like Mark Andrews, like Travis Kelce, Jimmy Graham over the years, where they were the leading receiver on their team with a high number of targets. They were more valuable to us in fantasy than any wide receiver on the team. So I can understand we want to see Brock Bowers, in a great offense next to a great quarterback and great wide receivers, and like the pie grows. But give me the ugly places where he's getting 140 targets. That guy will be like Evan Engram on steroids last year if we get him like these, 140 target, 130 targets.
Yeah.
So
I like that call, and I think the warning shot on that is we had Dalton Kincaid land in one of those spots where you'd want him to land, and it's hard for him to get all the way where you would want him to get as a rookie when you're competing with Stephon Diggs there for the touches.
No, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to dive into this 2024 rookie class. We're going to rip through a bunch of running backs and a bunch of wide receivers with Curtis Patrick here on Dynasty Life.
Now, I know many of you are looking for a secret weapon for your Dynasty League, and I have it. It's called the Dynasty Dominator app. You go to the App Store, go to Google Play. It's right there. It's $5 to download, and then every year it's $5 to load the next incoming class of rookies. You can add Superflex, add tight end premium. It's incredible. because it allows you to look up players. It allows you to vote on whether a player is a buy, hold, or sell, and then see the market sentiment on that player. And you can compare their lifetime value rating from Player Profiler to their Dynasty ADP at the FFPC, all in the price lookup tool. And beyond that, we have a trade analyzer, so you'll never lose another Dynasty trade again. And in our settings, you can set this is a win now team, this is a rebuilding team, and then we let you compare players. Look at their metrics side by side, prospect metrics, NFL metrics. It's all there. It's $5 in the App Store. There's some add-ons for Superflex and to buy the upcoming rookie class. Every year, you're going to spend $5 on this thing, and it's going to be well worth it.
Welcome back to Dynasty Life. Theo Gremminger with Curtis Patrick. And Curtis, before we dive into the players, let's talk about the process. You guys go through a big process over at RotoViz. Really, how do you measure data versus film?
I mean, we don't really measure it. I think,
or weigh. Let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
How do you weigh them versus one another?
Yeah, we obviously, our process and our history is rooted in data, and not that data is predictive, and actually oftentimes people look at too much data. It's kind of like the same thing you were talking about. If you listen to too many voices, you can almost arrive at any conclusion that you would want to. And data can be that way. It can be dangerous, but there are some key things that we know to be true. And if the further you zoom out, the more practical it becomes. If it was just as simple as basically looking at production and age, those are the two things that are that and draft capital. That is the special sauce. If you didn't even go a level deeper than that, you would do pretty well. You would outperform somebody that had a random process or that was drafting based off of whatever most recent fantasy pundit that they happen to come across on Twitter that year. So, we definitely use data to our advantage, and it's not necessarily that data will always enable us to make the right pick every time, but we believe we have proven that we can make fewer draft mistakes. And so you might miss on some hits because you're relying on that data, because there are those outlier players that are just so good in film, or their landing spot was just so great, or they end up in the perfect situation with a coordinator quarterback marriage, and that really unlocks their upside. But again, the weight is on the data. Now, from a film perspective, we do have, and that is the value of the summit. We have to cross-check ourselves, because while film is super, super subjective and it's only as good as the eye, and film people will tell you, they have plenty of misses as well. And so, they can scout for traits, and they can think that they can identify system fits, and they can think that, their eye is so good that they can, predict draft capital and things like that. But it's an extremely, extremely noisy process. But when there's a lot of alignment on film, that's where you may be, all right, all these film guys are saying the same thing. And it's, here's 5 or 6 guys maybe that we trust. Okay, do we need, this guy was at the top of this tier. Do we need to move him into the bottom of the other tier? Just in case we're wrong. We'll do stuff like that. Or here's a guy that the data says is awesome, and the film guys also say he's awesome. All right, he should be at the top of this tier, because we have another input source saying, here's a reason why this guy might succeed. And so I'm definitely not going to be a person that says film has no value. I'm just going to say that's not how I'm going to approach things. You can't realistically scout every single player from a film perspective with the same level of conviction and be honest with yourself that you're going to arrive, with a consistent model. You're just not. But I think that I can say, all right, for the 50 players that matter, they probably matter in a typical rookie draft. All right, well, we can try to look at some of the film feedback on those guys and layer it into our analysis in a meaningful but unsubstantial way. I don't know if that's similar to how you guys handle it. You do have people on your team like Cody that have some training in that area, and so that's an advantage. But I also imagine that, you have some counterbalances in place.
Absolutely. And I think you can get into trouble when you weigh your analysis too much in either direction. And I think another thing that can kind of mess people up
Yeah.
is the combine. I love the combine.
Oh my gosh.
I actually
Yeah.
really enjoy it. I like watching the 40-yard dashes. I know that, you've Scott smart people like Scott Barrett saying it actually kind of hurt if a guy runs too fast. I get it, but I still enjoy it. I think it's the football fan in me. And we just love seeing the next level of athlete that we get, especially at the skill position in the NFL. Every year I enjoy it. But does it mess people up in their process, Curtis?
I think it messes a ton of people up. It messed me up a ton when I was starting out as an analyst. That's for sure, because we know by and large that combine performance is overvalued, and that's because we live in an information-starved news cycle at all times, and so a great performance gets double counted, triple counted, quadruple counted, and a guy who was already high in your rankings gets pushed up even higher when he does what he was expected to do. And that's just a natural tendency. And then people are looking for attention with their analysis, and so then you get into hot take season. It's dangerous in the dynasty streets from the second that an amazing or a disastrous, relatively disastrous combine performance occurs. I mean, what we know is that the combine is probably, from a fantasy perspective, it's probably most important for tight ends. And the reason for that is we know that it correlates very tightly with tight end draft position, and draft capital is even more important for tight ends than some of the other positions, because not a lot of tight ends have a lot of college production. That's just the way that it goes. And so it carries more overall relative weight in the tight end draft analysis and fantasy football analysis cycle, because you need that additional input more than anything else. Now, for running backs, things like speed score and kind of overall agility, they can help to paint a picture and give us more accurate sims in some way. But still, you're still going to be better off if you mostly just look at weight and production. So you have to be careful how much you layer that in. And then for wide receivers, there's plenty of really interesting studies, and this is kind of, I think, what you're talking about with Scott. I mean, I've seen a lot of different versions of this study, and we've done some of them ourselves at RotoViz too. You would actually be better off, for the most part, if you went draft capital round by round and then drafted the slowest wide receiver by draft capital in each of those rounds. Over the course of time, you would be better off, because a player is being drafted in that round despite performing less admirably in the 40, and that is going to be the case because maybe their age-adjusted production popped in an NFL model, or their production, or their film analysis, or their interview, or their scheme fit, or their route tree. They're being drafted in that round despite their 40. And I mean, the classic fantasy examples of this are like Jarvis Landry and Keon Allen and players like that. Cooper Kupp.
Anquan Bolden, Cooper Kupp,
4.471, I think it was back in the day. I don't know that a lot of your maybe not a lot of people remember Anquan Bolden watching this show on YouTube, but
if somebody ran Anquan Bolden's 40 tomorrow, I'd probably cross him off the list just to show you. But I think that's a great way. It's a great way of looking at it, though, Curtis, because you also sort of avoid the guys who are drafted to kind of be specialists. You think about these guys that'll, the John Rosses, the Henry Ruggses, who get that high draft capital without necessarily the same production, even as some of their college teammates. And I think it's a fascinating way to look at it. It's very Billy Bean. It's like, hey, let's look for the fat guy who gets on base all the time, as opposed to the guys getting drafted for his athleticism. Very interesting stuff. But let's dive into these running backs a little bit. Let's ask from a macro perspective. Is this running back class too beat up? We don't have Breece Hall. We don't have Jahmyr Gibbs. We don't have Bijan Robinson. We don't necessarily have a De'Von Achane who's going to break through and be a 17-point per game guy. But when I look at this draft class, I see a lot of utility. I like this draft class more than most. There's a number of these guys that I want to have on my dynasty teams, and I think that it's set up for sort of a proper value where the market is going to beat these guys up. I'm going to be able to get a lot of these guys in like the second round. I'm going to take shots on them. Am I wrong there about this class?
I mean, I'm not going to call you wrong. So yeah, I'm definitely not going to call you wrong or right, because what I will say is most analysts would do well to approach this running back class with a lot of humility, because I think there's always a temptation to plant flags, or my rankings are the best. The bottom line is, we know there will probably be a couple guys that end up being valuable in fantasy, and valuable as NFL players from this running back class, because that just tends to be true every single year. But there's no sterling profiles. There's a lot of guys that check a couple boxes, and that list is actually really, really deep. And so to say that which guy is going to end up getting the draft capital today, or which guy will succeed in spite of his draft capital, I'm just preaching caution, because there are probably, there are like 10 to 12 interesting guys here. I think that you can start to paint a picture of who probably is most deserving of being in that tier one, but one of the guys that I would have in my first tier, we don't even know like when he'll be able to play. He's got an ACL.
That's right.
And Jonathan Brooks, of course. And so, I could contextualize it like this. One of the things in the rookie draft guide that we did, that I talked about at the top of the show, was Blair Andrews' prospect lab score. And that's a percentile based, quality score, everything that goes into the RotoViz soup. Now, we haven't solved for the athleticism yet, and speed score will go into there. And the official running back weights, we had unofficial weights that we used for that score early in the process, but we're going to have official weights on these guys now. There's only 3 guys that rated above the 60th percentile historically over the last 20 years. And those 3 guys are Jonathan Brooks. He had a 71st percentile score. Braelon Allen at a 63rd percentile. And then Audric Estime at 65th percentile. And so that doesn't mean that those are definitely the top 3 guys. But if we're just looking, at, the past 2 decades, last year we had some guys that were, they were above the 80th percentile, and then they also ended up getting the first round draft capital. So it just became extremely exciting. We're not sure there are going to be any running backs drafted on day one this year, right? That would probably be a surprise if anybody was. And now we know that there's really not a lot of options above the 60th percentile. So what it looks like is a lot of average prospects. Some of them will end up maybe bumping above average a little bit based off of the strength of their athleticism. And then maybe that, the guys that end up getting the day 2 draft capital get that little bump. But I'm saying this early in the process, it's dangerous to assume that who those guys are. And so that's where I would caution the humility in the approach. But if you want to get into like how deep is the tier, or get into any of these guys specifically, we can do that, because there are some interesting profiles.
Well, let's start with Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks right now, there's some enthusiasm. A lot of people have him at RB1 overall in their rookie rankings. This is a guy that yards per carry were quite similar to Bijan Robinson. He's got the size. He has the explosiveness. He can catch the football. And he's also 20 years old. Not a whole lot of tread on the tires. If he didn't get injured, this is a guy that I think we'd have clear-cut RB1 overall in this class. And
Agreed.
A guy that would be touching up on those, not the top 3 wide receivers, but he'd be right there with the Troy Franklins, the Brian Thomases in that little tier. It would be my opinion. But we're coming off a major injury. The underdog market is still weighing him as the only rookie being drafted inside of RB3 land. There's some optimism about him getting back on the field for the start of the season. I'm a little cautious with him. I want to see where the draft capital lands, and I've ranked him a little closer to like RB4, RB5. I want to rank him at 1, but again, I have to go with the healthier guy that I know is going to be on the field until the NFL tells me otherwise. Is that the appropriate way to approach Jonathan Brooks, or is this a guy that is that good that you're willing to risk it a little bit more?
We do have him as our RB1. Pre-combine. And of course, we're not going to be able to adjust for him. What we know about him is all we're going to know about him until we can solve for draft capital, right? We're not going to get anything else on his profile, really. So to go in a little deeper on some of the metrics that you were referencing, kind of high level, I mean, Brooks averaged 3.5 yards after contact. He had a 27% evasion rate, which is very respectable. He broke 30 tackles and then forced 21 missed tackles. So I think it's one thing that some people don't do, and I think Sean did an awesome job of this in our guide this year, is really hammering home this idea that looking only at evasion rate without the context of how they were evading the tackles can be a little dangerous, because what we've seen over time is that players have an asymmetric balance between broken and forced missed tackles. The guys that are heavier on the broken tackles, that doesn't translate well to explosive plays in the NFL. Case in point, Najee Harris, right? And so we want guys that can actually just force a missed tackle rather than break a tackle. He did have 286 receiving yards and 29 targets. He was putting up missed forced tackles as a receiver as well. He had 2.5 yards per route run. So, I mean, these are all things that point to a player that, yeah, he could be a fantasy difference maker in the NFL. I think from a redraft perspective, you're spot on that it's like, I mean, how patient are we going to be with a guy in best ball? I mean, you're drafting him basically hoping that he can be a late season hammer. You better be pretty good drafter and throughout the single digit rounds and hit on all your other players, because you're going to have to get to the playoffs before you really get that benefit for him to be fully healthy. It's kind of what we saw with Breece Hall coming off his year one injury, ending up being a pretty productive player in year two, but it took a second for him to warm up there. So yeah, I'm not gonna call you incorrect. I mean, RB4, it feels a little low to me if we're just talking pure dynasty, because again, we get the age, and some of these guys are gonna get drafted and then they're gonna tear their ACL as a rookie. He's already passed that. Good point. Right. Yeah. He's already passed that. These guys are going to get beat up. That's what happens to running backs. It just happens. It happened to Christian McCaffrey. I mean, it just happens. And so, you like the production, you like the age. We've got him at RB1 now. That being said, the other guys that I mentioned that have that above 60th percentile pre-combine prospect lab score, Braelon Allen has an opportunity to put up some pretty exciting combine performance from a speed score perspective. And that guy is a unit. And so It's possible. And he's also very young and he was very productive. And so I reserve the right to make an adjustment there. I would say the same about Estime out of Notre Dame. I mean, he's also one of the bigger backs in the class. Doesn't have quite the same age situation, but in comparison to Kyron Williams, who came in and after a year looked really, really good in the NFL offense. I mean, he compares favorably with what he was able to do in that Notre Dame offense. So those are the three guys that I think could potentially separate. There's guys that are below that 60th percentile that there's some excitement about too. And I'll just paint with broad strokes. And if you want to zoom in on any of these guys, you just let me know.
One guy I would like you to touch base on is Trey Benson, because this is a guy where some people have him RB1 overall land. This is a guy that does have he's going to test well. The athleticism is there. The size is there. This is a guy where we talk about old injuries. One thing that'll be interesting to me is, do the NFL teams not like the old injuries at Oregon? I don't think that's necessarily being discussed enough, but he certainly looked healthy at Florida State. There were some people like Ray Garvin was disappointed with him this year at Florida State with what we got out of him, wanted to like him more, still like on the list, but not like enamored. Then there's some people which are pushing him up a little bit. Where are you generally with Trey Benson? Because that's a guy that I think a lot of fantasy managers want to like early in the process.
Yeah, I think Ray would maybe be off of him for different reasons. Ray is a guy that trusts his eye. He played Division II college football. He brings a different skill set than I would bring from a fantasy perspective. But, love Ray, been on his show and, respect how he goes about it. And I love his conviction when he's in on somebody. He's pretty exciting.
For sure.
With Benson, it's like, for me, it's more of a wait and see, because we just didn't see him accumulate the volume that you would want from a running back. I mean, running back production in college is definitely one of the main things you're looking at for somebody to be able to translate it to the NFL. And so you can zoom on individual metrics and find reasons to tell yourself that, okay, if Trey Benson succeeds in the NFL, here's why I wouldn't be surprised. But, just carries in general is something that's important. And I mean, a 27% running back dominator rate, that is not impressive. I mean, there were two other Florida State backs that had 90 plus carries, and another guy who got the preferred receiving touches in that offense last year. And so why couldn't you get it on lock? And I mean, maybe that was schematic, and we'll find that, you know, that's how Florida State's just going to use guys in the future. And we've seen some of this, you know, I think there's been Alabama backs over the past 5-6 years that ended up a little bit down the depth chart. And, you know, it ended up that just, you know, maybe all those guys were pretty good, and that's why no one separated. So there's a teammate element to this. But if you're looking for reasons to be excited, you know, he had 2.6 yards per route run. That's actually a little bit above even what Brooks was able to bring to the table. And, you know, he had a similarly impressive 31.4% evasion rate and 4.4 yards after contact. So he's doing things okay on a per opportunity and per touch basis. I think what I look at is, who are the Sims that I get for Trey Benson? If I give him a day 2 assumed draft capital, which I have in this process, you know, Blair gives him a 49th percentile prospect lab score. So he's average there, right? Here's the guys, man. I get, you know, Devonta Freeman is by far the best sim that pops. Devonta Freeman was a day 3 guy. You know,
and RB1 overall though. RB1 overall in year 2.
He was, and he's also a Florida State guy, so that's kind of interesting.
There you go. Very cool.
But you know, I think it's a, in the same ways that it's a victory, it's also a little bit of a warning, because even if I call Trey Benson a day 2 guy, one of his top sims is a day 3 guy. Like, directionally, that's not what I would like to see. I also see TJ Yeldon. I mean, you know, TJ Yeldon's like the second best guy in his top 5 sims. I get Kendre Miller, jury's still out, Matt Jones, Hassan Haskins. So Benson will need a strong combine to redeem these sims, or he'll need strong draft capital, you know, early round 2 or sneaking into round 1, which I'm not sure that can really happen. So Benson probably will, there's nothing he can probably do short of just get, you know, drafted in the top 15 like Jahmyr Gibbs or something like that would signal a team's intent with them. It's going to be difficult for him to jump into my top tier. He would be a guy that I would say, I'm not sure he belongs above RB4, kind of like what you're saying with Brooks.
And it's interesting because Benson's a guy where I think in a couple of days, there's going to be a lot more people on Audric Estime, and then also like the Jalen Wrights, the Marshawn Lloyds could potentially test better. And those guys are kind of the trajectory pointing up type guys. So definitely an interesting one. Quickly talk about 2 interesting sleepers. Dylan Laube, who I got to give a shout out, Long Island guy. We don't get a whole lot of Long Island to the NFL guys. We got Jeremy Ruckert, DeBrickashaw Ferguson, a couple other ones. And now we're going to get Dylan Laube from way out east, Hamptons guy, went to New Hampshire. The RotoViz models must love the receiving production. He also led the country in all-purpose yards. He's a freak. And that Central Michigan game, his only game against FBS competition, he had like 250, 275 yards receiving.
275 yards receiving.
Yeah, it's insane. It was insane. He had the craziest stat line ever. Literally, their whole game plan was to check down to Dylan Laube against Central Michigan, and the game was like a 49-46 type game. Went nuts. Talk us about him, and also Jaden Shirden from Monmouth.
Okay, yeah, we'll start with Laube. Laube really built a pretty nice fan base, I think, there at the Senior Bowl this year too.
Oh yeah.
And so that, you know, and that's we won't get sidetracked here, but I will say it's been pretty cool to see how the fantasy community has embraced the scouting process at the Senior Bowl. I mean, Jim Nagy has been so accepting of people from all corners of, you know, the football world and promoting that event in Mobile. And, you know, we've seen some cool stories come out of the Senior Bowl, and some real sleepers hit that excelled in Senior Bowl week. And so I think that is something that it's worth paying attention to now. If it's not part of your process, at least follow somebody that pays attention and, you know, see who it is that stands out to them. Yeah, but Laube, I mean, you know, he caught 54 balls early in the first couple seasons across those seasons, but he had 68 receptions last year, 699 receiving yards, had over 140 scrimmage yards per game. And, you know, the lack of efficiency on a yards per carry basis is a little, you know, you'd like to see guys over 5 yards per carry, ideally over 5.5 yards per carry in college. But, you know, he was obviously his team's only game plan for the most part. And so everyone's kind of keying up on him. He has a similar prospect lab score in between the 40th and 50th percentiles as Trey Benson. So, you know, Blair's model really likes him. But what's interesting is if I give him day 3 draft capital, below where Benson was, I get way more interesting profile sims. I get a pair of lower drafted players that ended up hitting, and then I get a day 2 guy that ended up hitting. 3 of his top 5 sims: Rashad White, DeMarco Murray, and Kyron Williams. That's a way better list than what I see from Trey Benson. In fact,
forget that Trey Benson guy. Forget that.
Yeah,
guy.
that's a 60% hit. That's a 60% hit. So for Laube, I mean, really what we're looking for is, it'd be great if he gets drafted, right? We'd like him to get drafted and not be a UDFA. I think he probably locked that in Mobile. And, if he could be an early day 3 guy rather than a late day 3 guy, we'll be even more excited. And then we wanted to talk about Shirden. Now, Shirden is the sleeper that I've been saving here, because I lied to you a few minutes ago. I told you there were only 3 players that scored above the 60th percentile in Blair's model. Well, it's really that there was only 3. There's only 3 FBS players that scored above the 60th percentile in Blair's model. Shirden is actually the secret number 4. Of course, he's an FCS player from Monmouth, 68th percentile, second most highly scored player in the class. There's a huge adjustment you have to make for the competition level, obviously. But man, this guy, you want to talk about a revelation. He went for more than 275 scrimmage yards twice last year. And he had 26 career rushing touchdowns, Theo, 14 of them. So more than half of his career rushing touchdowns went for 50 plus yards. So home run hitter, you can argue all day about the quality of the defenders trying to chase him down on those long plays, but home run hitter, and he's a finisher. I mean, so that's great. I mean, for anybody that has, a deeper scouting department in the NFL, this is probably one of those guys that they're secretly hoping will still be there, still be around. And what I really like here is, even if I assign him an undrafted free agent level of investment, so he doesn't even have to get drafted, he still pulls Aaron Jones and Dion Lewis in his top 5 profile sims. We still get a 40% hit rate in his top 5. And Aaron Jones is like a classic example of a small school guy who came in, took a little bit to get going. And I mean, he's been a dynasty and fantasy stalwart, despite his lack of draft capital and relatively unimpressive level of opponent competition. So Shirden, that's a name maybe nobody's heard yet on your show. I don't know. Maybe
I'll give you a big hat tip. We've had future cast with John Laube, Matty Kiwoom, getting all these people talking about their deep sleepers. This is the first person to talk Shirden. So that's one that I need to dive into a little bit more. I'm going to text Cody Carpenter after the show and Matty Kiwoom and see their thoughts on him. But I'll just say Jaleel McLaughlin. If you would have just penciled in Jaleel McLaughlin this time last year, could have saved yourself a lot of fab. Interesting guys. Some of these small school guys, and Youngstown State might as well be Notre Dame compared to Monmouth, but it's still the same level. So we're running out of time here, but I want to quickly run through some of these wide receivers.
Okay.
Lightning round. Where should Marvin Harrison Jr. be drafted in Superflex?
I'm waiting until after the combine to put my rookies into my overall startup rankings. I will say
it's right now. No landing spots, just knowing what we know on him versus the rest of the quarterbacks.
Well, I'm still going to say he probably belongs in round 2 because we know he's going to get the draft capital, and what we know about running backs about wide receivers with his level of draft capital and his profile is basically, as long as he doesn't completely whiff as a rookie, he's going to maintain his value. It's a way to invest and maintain value.
It's the Bijan Robinson corollary. If you want to flip Marvin Harrison next year, he doesn't have to play it down. You could still flip him for another quarterback in Superflex all day long next year. Malik Nabers, is he the number 1 wide receiver in 2023 and 2022 based on where you had the guys in the class?
I mean, we've really got them 1A and 1B. They've got 83rd and 84th percentile prospect scores, respectively. Nabers actually edges Harrison by 1 percentile point, and their sims, they both hit 4 out of their 5 sims. I mean, the sims for Harrison are the 4 that hit are Sammy Watkins, Amari Cooper, Drake London, and Mike Evans. His 1 whiff was Justin Blackman. We talked about that. And then for Nabers, the 4 hits are Jamar Chase, Julio Jones, OBJ. They draw the similar player in Sammy Watkins, and then his whiff was John Ross. Of course, those player names will change once we have the combine measurements for Malik Nabers. Of course, Harrison not competing, so that'll make it a little tough.
You had me at OBJ and Jamar Chase. We'll leave it at
Yeah,
that
that's
one.
pretty awesome.
Talk about some wide receivers you're interested in. I'm interested. Troy Franklin. That's a guy that I'm really into, and he's going to be available to us after like the elite tier. Call him a mid first in single QB leagues, and a guy could be a really valuable late first in Superflex. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I've got him valued similarly. He would be kind of like that number 7 player overall for me in Superflex right now, a couple spots higher, obviously in single QB. If you're going to take one soundbite on Troy Franklin away from this episode, he was actually the highest rated receiver in terms of quarterback rating when targeted in all of college football among receivers with at least 80 targets, 146.8 receiver rating last year. That's Troy Franklin. He has 69th percentile prospect lab score. So right in line with like our top running backs in terms of how he would relate to historical prospects. Not a bad list of sims here for him either. He had 3 mega hits. Well, 2 really mega hits, another hit. And then even one of his misses is kind of a guy that's hung around for a while. So he draws Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Calvin Ridley in his production profile sims. I mean, come on.
There you go.
One of his misses is Nelson Aguilar, who was still useful at times in his career, just never had a wide receiver 2 or better season. And then Justin Hunter being the miss there.
Yeah, I'm really into Troy Franklin. Your quick thoughts on Keon Coleman, one that I'm a little bit ahead of than some people. I had him, always in my wide receiver ranks. This is a guy that I look at as a 20-year-old, outperformed Jaden Reed at Michigan State, had the 3 touchdown game against LSU. I want to like him. There's other people who say he can't separate. This is a guy that's going to struggle to put up big-time fantasy production. Where are you at here on Keon Coleman?
Well, it's so funny. Yeah, because I'm still figuring it out too. You mentioned a couple of things to be excited about, the age and then the performance versus another high-performing teammate. He did meet one of our key criteria at RotoViz. I mean, he had a true breakout with the Dominator rating above 30%. We know that 30% is a much better number than 20%, which most of the industry uses in terms of further eliminating potential misses when you're doing your ranking. So 34%, very impressive. He only gets a 53rd percentile prospect lab score, but he draws 2 guys that I think he actually is. It's like he's a style sim to these players, not just a production sim. And you mentioned the Film Bros point about him not separating necessarily. Well, how about this for 2 guys that aren't really known for their separation qualities, Michael Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins. He also pulls T. Higgins. So 3 out of 5 hit rate, similar to Troy Franklin in his top 5. His misses, though, one of the misses would be the warning shot here. When you think about players that can't separate, Laquan Treadwell pops into his top 5, and then Jalen Reagor. So the miss is a little bit scarier with Coleman than some of those other players that we talked about. But yeah, I mean, he does have impressive size, and for a team in a need of a possession receiver, maybe he could come in and be a Michael Pittman type contributor in an offense. And not every single player is going to be Jamar Chase or OBJ from a level of excitement perspective. I'm still fine with the guy who scores 16 PPR in a boring fashion. I know you are too.
100%. And yeah. I mean, I'm not even allowed to mention, people say I say it all the time, he played basketball at Michigan State. Also very cool for the guys we're drafting. He played for Tom Izzo. Ladd McConkey versus Roman Wilson. These 2 guys are going to be in similar ranges. They're both intriguing. Which one do you prefer at this stage in the process?
Well, this is a scary one, man, because these guys they grade horribly in the RotoViz process because they just don't have enough production for us to know. Like, and this is where the film comes in here, like, because the film is just going to be totally these guys are in on these 2 players from with Roman Wilson. It's like, all right, well, it's not his fault that Michigan had this weird scheme, and he's going to be one of the fastest receivers in the class, and everyone's going to figure out that JJ McCarthy and Roman Wilson were so much better than their stats said. Like, that's the narrative that's playing out. And with McConkey, it's like, no one's going to be able to cover this guy in space. And Georgia had so much talent. You're like, yeah, it doesn't matter that he never had 600 receiving yards in a season. So this is one where RotoViz will lean on some evaluations of some of the film players, but the film analysts. But what I will say is, I think if I was going to say who would end up maybe having more dynasty value if they hit, I would be more in on Roman Wilson, because I think he's going to have the athleticism and could profile like a player that would be able to add, big plays. I think that I think when I think of Ladd McConkey, like a hit for him, maybe it would be something like a Jamison Crowder. Like there's a limit to what a hit looks like for a player like that. And I mean, sure, if you don't have to pay a lot for him, that's fine. But if he gets around to real NFL draft capital, you're going to have to invest a lot in a rookie draft. Roman Wilson, it could just end up being one of these situations where, the RotoViz process trying to help us eliminate misses causes us to keep him outside of our funnel, and we're just wrong. So I will say he is one of the players that's circled for us where we need to go back and look at him after the combine and make sure that we're following along.
Yeah, and before I get you out of here, I'm going to let you go dealer's choice here, Curtis. Talk to us about Tez Walker, Malik Washington, or Xavier Legette. These are guys that are either kind of sleepers, or Legette is interesting because has the one big year of production, measured in smaller than we thought at the Senior Bowl, and he's old. The guy's going to be 23 years old as a rookie wide receiver. So I'll let you pick from those three guys. Dealer's choice, or you can talk about two of them quickly if you want to.
Yeah, I'm going to do all three of them in 20 seconds or less for each guy.
Love it.
Tez Walker, almost 60th percentile prospect lab score, 3 out of 5 hits. He draws Keenan Allen, Jarvis Landry, and Christian Kirk in his top 5. The film guys hate him, say that he's undisciplined in his route running, and he doesn't have great hands, but he's a big play machine, 17.0 ADOT. We probably will be ahead of the industry on Devontae Walker. Xavier Legette is an absolute unit. Yes, he's older, but he is, this guy is big. He is cut out of marble.
He's an AJ Brown size guy. He's literally
if Xavier Legette hits, everyone would be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. He does have a 40% hit rate within his top 5. You mentioned only the 1 year of production that penalizes him in Blair's model, but he does pull Rashee Rice and Michael Pittman, which are two pretty interesting names there. And then way down the list, Malik Washington. This is a guy who had a really interesting journey. He basically did nothing at Northwestern for 4 years, ends up grad transferring to Virginia, and he was just a revelation. Absolutely revelation. This past year was first in the nation in receptions per game, second in receiving yards per game. You don't want to throw out, crazy names for players ever because, people use it in sound bites against you. But he does have that skill set where it's like, man, he can take it to the house no matter how he touches it. An absolute weapon in the from an evasion perspective. And I'll be really interested to see if he gets draft capital. You do have to remember, Tyreek Hill was a day 3 guy. Malik Washington, obviously not calling him Tyreek Hill, but he has that just it factor. When you watch him, he's just so exciting, man.
It's a Sean Siegel line. I believe that it's the best indicator for future NFL production is college production, or was it NFL production? Yep. Yeah. So that's Malik Washington. He caught a few passes this year at UVA. If you want to just go and look at his stat line, it was very, very impressive.
If you want to give people credit, the other thing too that we've done over the years, Travis May used to be on the site with us, and he does a lot of Devy work. He was always a big proponent. One thing I took from my relationship with him over the years when we were working together was, judge a player by, his peak. Don't forget the peak. And Malik Washington's peak was pretty high.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Curtis, let everybody know where they can find your work once again. Appreciate your time. I kept you a couple minutes late here. I don't want to get you out of here.
That's all right, man. I had a blast. I'm sure we could go for hours and could have done another episode. So, if you've never come across my stuff before, you can follow me on Twitter /X at CPatrickNFL. I'm part of the RotoViz.com family, one of the owners there, along with Sean Siegel, Dave Cabin, and Blair Andrews. We also have a great writing staff, tons of data-driven analysis, RotoViz.com. And then, we do have the rookie guide out right now that we're peddling that we think, fits in a really nice niche of the industry. So, hopefully you like this. We are on YouTube as well. Dave Cabin and I drop shows 2 to 3 days a week on podcasts, RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast, and oftentimes we will post those on YouTube as well. So you can check us out, RotoViz Video on YouTube, or follow RotoViz Radio on wherever you consume your podcasts.
Yeah, definitely check out Curtis's work. It is good stuff. Right here on Dynasty Life on Sunday, possibly Monday, Ian Miller and I are going to do a combine winners and losers show. Then look for more Dynasty Life. I'm going to try to drop about 2 of these every single week. No sleep till rookie drafts, Curtis. We're rocking and rolling. Everybody enjoy the combine this weekend.